Namo Buddhaya. Today we're going to be learning about something very, very deep. So our great teacher, the Supreme Buddha, appeared into this world and revealed to this world the noble truths, right? It's called the Four Noble Truths. What are the Four Noble Truths? The Noble Truth of suffering. The Noble Truth of cause of suffering. And the Noble Truth of the cessation of suffering. And the Noble Truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called the Four Noble Truths. So the Supreme Buddha teaches that the Supreme Buddha understood what suffering is. What is suffering? The Supreme Buddha explains. Having to be born is suffering. Right? And then having to grow old, having to age leads to suffering. And having to fall sick leads to suffering. And having to die leads to suffering. And having to become separated from the ones we love is suffering. And having to be together with those we don't like is suffering. And not getting what we want is suffering. That is, we like to not age, but we can't get it. That leads to suffering. We like not to die, but we have to die. So that leads to suffering. And at the end, the Supreme Buddha explains, Sankittena Panchupadana Khandas Dukkha. In short, the Supreme Buddha explains, the five aggregates of clinging is suffering. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about a sutta where the Supreme Buddha explains about these five aggregates of clinging. Okay, now this is a very difficult concept to understand. If a person understood the reality of the five aggregates of clinging, then that person would escape from this journey of birth and death. That is why when our great teacher, through his own wisdom, understood the reality of these five aggregates of clinging and understood the noble truths, the Supreme Buddha at first didn't feel like teaching the Dhamma to others, because the Supreme Buddha thought that people in this world won't be able to understand this Dhamma, because this Dhamma is very deep. It's very subtle. It's very difficult to understand. Okay? But afterwards, when the Supreme Buddha looked into the world, the Supreme Buddha saw that out of all beings in this world, there are at least a few beings who have matured their wisdom enough to understand the reality. And so it was out of compassion for them that the Supreme Buddha taught this Dhamma. Okay? Because remember, the Supreme Buddha teaches, Panyavanta sayan dhammo nayan dhammo duppanyasa. This Dhamma is for the wise, not for the unwise. If a person does not have wisdom, that person will never be able to form a pleasant mind about this Supreme Buddha's teaching, and he'll never be able to understand the Supreme Buddha's teaching. That is why this wisdom is so important to us. And in our previous session, we learned things that we need to practice in our life in order to develop wisdom, right? I hope you remember those factors. And out of those 8 factors, the final factor that the Supreme Buddha taught that we need to develop within our life in order to develop wisdom is investigating the 5 aggregates of clinging, Panchupadana Khandha. Okay, so if this is the first time that you have joined the Sutta class, you may find this difficult to understand, But if you can at least form a pleasant mind about the Supreme Buddha's deep understanding, the Supreme Buddha's complex understanding about the reality of this world, then that pleasant mind will one day help you to understand this Dhamma. Okay, because you're very fortunate that it's very rarely that a person in this world gets to listen to this deep Dhamma taught by the Supreme Buddha through a Buddha's wisdom. Okay, so you're very fortunate. So this is not easy to understand at all. That's why the Supreme Buddha said that this Dhamma is very subtle and deep. It takes a lot of wisdom. So when you learn this, you'll have to investigate and learn it over and over and over again for a long time in order to understand this, at least a little bit. Okay, so but unless we start to learn these deep concepts, we'll never be able to understand. Okay, if a person starts to investigate and think deeply about this deep Dhamma in this life, then that practice will come with you and will help you to understand this Dhamma that you are not able to understand in this life, in a future life. That is the value of thinking deep about this Dhamma and investigating about this Dhamma. Okay? So today we're going to be learning a sutta, and the name of this sutta is called Penapindupama Sutta. The name of the sutta is Penapindupama Sutta. So this is found in the Khanda Samyutta, that is Samyutta Nikaya, the third book. Okay, so there's a whole section called the Khanda Samyutta. Khanda means the aggregates. Okay, there's a whole section of the Supreme Buddha's teaching regarding this topic that we are discussing today. So if you can take some time and read this over and over and over and over again, then little by little you'll be able to understand these deep concepts. Okay. So on one occasion, the Supreme Buddha, the Blessed One, was dwelling at a place at the bank of the river Ganges, in a place called Ayodhya. Okay, so if you're in India, I'm sure you're familiar with these. There, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus. Okay, the Supreme Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, suppose." Okay, so before actually we start this, now let me tell you what are the 5 aggregates of clinging. We should first know that. The Supreme Buddha explained, in short, the 5 aggregates of clinging leads to suffering. It's suffering. So it is because we cling to these 5 aggregates of clinging that we are continuing to go in this journey of birth and death. So we should first understand that. Okay, so now we'll learn what the 5 aggregates of clinging are. Okay, the first one is Rupupadana Khanda. Upadana Khanda is aggregate of clinging. Upadana means clinging. Skanda is the aggregate. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains the first aggregate of clinging is Rupa. Rupupadana Khanda. We cling to the aggregate of Rupa. Rupa means forms. The second is Vedana Upadana Khanda, the aggregate of clinging to the aggregate of feeling. The third is Sanya Upadana Khanda, that is the aggregate of perception. And the fourth is Sankhara Upadana Khanda, that is the aggregate of volitional formations. And the fifth is Vinyanupadana Khanda, the aggregate of Vijnana means consciousness, the aggregate of clinging of consciousness. Okay, so these are the 5 aggregates of clinging. In short, we can say Rupa, Rupupadana Khanda, Vedanaupadana Khanda, Sanya Khanda, Sankarupadana Khanda, Vinyanupadana Khanda. In English, the aggregate of the form aggregate of clinging, the feeling aggregate of clinging, perception aggregate of clinging, volitional formational aggregate of clinging, and consciousness aggregate of clinging. Okay, so the first thing you should know is know what the 5 aggregates of clinging are. It's because of these 5 things that we are continuing to be reborn again and again. So if a person can abandon the clinging means that strong attachment to these 5, the Supreme Buddha explains that person can become free from the samsara. So how can you abandon the clinging to these 5 aggregates of clinging? By understanding the reality of it. If you understand the reality of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana, then you will be able to let go of the clinging. You'll be able to let go of the attachment to these 5 things. It's because we don't understand the reality of these 5 things that we cling to it. So when a Supreme Buddha teaches about these 5 aggregates of clinging and helps us to understand the reality of these 5 aggregates of clinging, a person has the opportunity to investigate and think and understand the reality and thereby abandon craving towards these 5 aggregates of clinging. Okay, so again, what are the 5 aggregates of clinging? What's the first one?
Rupa Upadana Kanda.
Rupa Upadana Kanda, the form aggregate of clinging. What's the second one?
Feeling aggregate of.
Yes. Vedana Upadana.
Upadana is
feeling aggregate of clinging. What's the third one?
Sanya Upadana Kanda.
Sanya Upadana Kanda, that is the aggregate of feeling of perception, the perception aggregate of clinging. And the fourth one is Sankara Upadana Kanda, the volitional formational aggregate of clinging. And the fifth is Vijnana Upadana Kanda, the consciousness aggregate of clinging. The Supreme Buddha teaches us a simile in order for us to understand the reality of these 5 aggregates of clinging. Okay, so there are 5 similes taught in the sutta, and if a person can understand each of these similes, then that person can get at least a slight idea of what forms are like, what Vedana, what Sanya, what Sankara, what Vijnana is like. Okay, that is why it's a at least a person can get a overall view of what kind of things these are. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains, because suppose that this river Ganges is carrying along a great lump of foam. Now, if you're in India, I'm sure you have seen this. In those huge rivers like Ganges, there are, in certain places, there are foam. When the water is flowing very fast in certain places, there are huge lumps of foam. Have any of you seen it in rivers? Yes? Okay.
Yes,
so the Supreme Buddha is at a river, at the river bank, and the Supreme Buddha is looking at those foam, and the Supreme Buddha is teaching the bhikkhus there. Right? The Supreme Buddha is saying, suppose that this river Ganges is carrying along a great lump of foam. Now, for you to understand what foam is, now suppose you take some laundry detergent and you shake the water, you put it in a basin, and then you put water and you shake the water. What happens is foam comes, right? That's what foam is. So Supreme Buddha is asking, suppose in this river Ganges, it's carrying along a great lump of foam, and a man with good sight would inspect it. So a person who can really see well would inspect that foam, ponder it, and carefully investigate it. Okay, so he's looking into the foam, and he's trying to understand what this foam is, what it's made of, what it's like. He's trying to investigate it. and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, and insubstantial. Now, when you see foam from the outside, it seems like it's such a big there's something how do you call it? Like from the outside, it seems like when you see the foam, there's something very big inside, right? But when you actually look inside, you realize there's actually nothing there. It's just made of air bubbles, right? So that foam, there's nothing substantial there. The Supreme Buddha explains, for what substance could there be in a lump of foam? A lump of foam, it quickly vanishes, right? The Supreme Buddha explains, so too, because whatever kind of forms there are, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, when a bhikkhu inspects, ponders, and carefully investigates it, it would appear to him to be void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? So the Supreme Buddha explains this form. Form means this rupa, this for example, if we take our body, that's a form. The Supreme Buddha explains these forms are made up of the four great elements: the earth element, the water element, the heat element, and the air element. And all the external forms that we see, okay, they're also made up of these four elements. So the Supreme Buddha explains, look at these forms as foam, as not having anything substantial within. Okay, but how do we look at this body? We look at this body as we give so much significance to this body. We give so much importance to this body, and we consider this body to be me, mine, and I, right? And therefore we cling to this body. But if a person actually investigates the reality of this body, he realized that there's absolutely nothing to take me, I, or mine in this body. That is why the Supreme Buddha asked us to develop Kaya Anupassana, mindfulness on the body, right? Now, this body, from the moment we are born, it's gradually aging, it's falling sick, and then what happens is this body dies, right? It's always changing. There's nothing permanent in this body. That's why the Supreme Buddha asked us to look at this body in terms of elements. Okay, there are certain parts in this body that will decay with earth. Okay, now if you take a dead body, there are certain parts in that body that will decay with earth. For example, the hair, the skin, the muscles, right? It decays and turns to soil. And then there are parts of the body that will dissolve with water, things like blood, pus, and phlegm. So once this body dies, those parts that's made of the water element would mix with the water element. And then there's the heat element. Okay, there's a warmth to our body. And what will happen is this warmth will mix with the external warmth and will disappear there. And then there's the air element. There's air in this body. And what will happen is once this body dies, the air will mix with the air and disappear. And so is there anything to call me, mine, and I there in this body? Once we separate it like that, we realize there's absolutely nothing to call me. How can we call our hair mine? No, it decays and it turns into soil. Can we call our skin it's mine? No, because it will decay with the soil and disappear. Can we call a blood mine? Now, once it's inside the body, we call this is my blood. This is my skin. This is my hair. But once his body lifespan ends, what happens is this body gets dispersed, and it mixes with the different elements, and there's absolutely nothing to call me, mine, or I there. So because the person does not understand this reality, we cling to this body as me. This is my body. This is me. This is I. Okay, and in the same way, we cling to other people around us. We cling to other bodies around us. That's external to us. That's my father, that's my mother, that's my husband, that's my sibling, right? But none of those things can be controlled the way we want. Those external bodies also will decay and will mix with the elements. Okay, so once a person realizes the reality of this body in this way, the Supreme Buddha explains, he realizes that his body is also like foam. There's nothing substantial in this body. Okay, so once a person understands that there's nothing substantial in the body, would he any longer cling to it? Would he become attached to it? No. He would feel dispassion. The passion that he had towards his body would be abandoned. And so that clinging would be abandoned. Okay, so that's why the Supreme Buddha explained the Supreme Buddha teaches us to look at this body in terms of form. There's nothing substantial to this body. It's always changing. It's always it's falling sick, and it's dying one day. We can't control it the way we want. But the ordinary being who does not understand this reality of the body, he clings to this body as me. This is my body. This is me. This is mine. This is I. The Supreme Buddha explains all forms. Now, we had bodies in the past. Where are they now? Right? Where are they now? Once we die, those bodies got decayed. So all bodies in the past became impermanent. And if we are to go ahead in this samsara, the bodies that will get in the future, what will happen? Those bodies will also become impermanent. It will decay and it will die. The Supreme Buddha explains, in this long journey of samsara, if a person collected the skeletons of the body that we have gotten within one eon, an eon is a number of years that cannot be calculated. If a person if a person collects the skeletons of the bodies that we have gotten in one eon, then it would be as high as Mount Vepula in India. Mount Vepula is a very high mountain. But because it decays, it does not accumulate, right? So the Supreme Buddha explains these forms are forms, and all external forms in the past, in the future, in the present. All of these things are impermanent. They are not going to be there forever. It's always changing. And therefore, we cannot call this me, mine, and I. So if a person can understand, so all external forms, all internal forms mean your body. External forms mean forms that are external to you. Okay? And gross bodies and subtle bodies. So even gross body means this human body is a gross body. Subtle bodies means bodies of devas, bodies of ghosts in those deva realms and ghost realms. They have subtle bodies. They are not gross. You cannot touch like this. You don't feel that grossness there. But all of those, whether gross or subtle, all of those bodies, they are impermanent. They change. There's nothing to call me, mine, and I there. Okay? Whether inferior or superior, whether you have an inferior body or superior body, all of these things are impermanent. So the Supreme Buddha explains, look at this body as form. That is, there's nothing substantial in this body. So if a person looks at the Rupa Padana Khanda in this way, if a person looks at Rupa, the forms in this way, that person will be able to understand the reality of Rupa or forms and will be able to understand the reality of it and therefore not cling to it. Okay, so that is the first one. So this Rupapadana Khanda is actually the most easiest one to understand of the five aggregates of clinging. The more we go, the more difficult it will be to understand. Okay, because Rupa is something that we are very familiar with. That it's a tactile object. We feel it, we can see it, right? But the other ones are they are mental formations, so they're very difficult to understand. Okay, so but just because it's difficult to understand doesn't mean you should not listen. You should give up. Okay, if you at least listen now, then in the future, one day you will be able to understand it. Okay, so that is what Rupapadana Khanda is. Okay, and then the second one is the Supreme Buddha explain the second Upadana Khanda, that is feelings. The Supreme Buddha teaches us the simile that we should use to understand what feelings are. Supreme Buddha explains, suppose bhikkhus that in the autumn, when it's raining and big raindrops are falling, a water bubble arises and bursts on the surface of the water. Okay, so when it's raining, when you look outside, a pool of water, you see that water bubbles are formed and then it bursts. And again, water bubbles are formed and it bursts. So suppose a very wise person who has the ability to see. Okay, so what the Supreme Buddha is saying here by having the ability to see is a wise person. Okay, so a person who has the ability to see when he's looking at these bubbles being formed and bursting, he realizes that these water bubbles are void. There's nothing inside. There's nothing substantial. It's hollow. It's insubstantial. It appears and it disappears. It appears and it disappears. Okay. So when they explain, so too bhikkhus, whatever kind of feelings there is, whether in the past, future, in the present, when a bhikkhu inspects and ponders and carefully investigates this, feelings would appear to him as void, as hollow, as insubstantial. For what substance could there be in feelings? So the Supreme Buddha asked us to look at feelings as water bubbles. What's the nature of water bubbles? They appear and they disappear. They appear and it disappears. So remember, the explains feelings are also like that. One moment we feel happy, the next moment we feel unhappy, the next moment again we feel happy, the next moment we feel neutral. There are three types of feelings: pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. So when we feel these things, we think that these feelings are mine. I am feeling this. I am feeling sad. I am feeling happy. I'm feeling neutral. I'm upset. Right? That's the way we think. But the Supreme Buddha explains, feelings are like water bubbles. They arise and they disappear. The Supreme Buddha teaches feelings arise because of contact. Passapacchya Vedana. Now, you have learned Paticca previously, therefore you know what feelings are, what the cause of feelings are, right? Passapacchya Vedana. Dependent on contact, there arises feelings. So when the eye, the form and the eye consciousness gets together, that's called contact, passa. And dependent on passa, dependent on contact, there arises feelings. Okay, so for example, if someone you love is in front of you, when that form of the person you love and the I consciousness gets together, when they merge, that's contact. And through contact, when you see that person, you get a happy feeling. And then you look the other way and you see someone you don't like. So again, the form and the I consciousness gets together. And this time, feelings gives a rise to an unhappy or unpleasant feeling because the form changed. So contact is always changing, just like a water bubble. The water bubble arises and vanishes, bursts. Feelings are also like this. You get a pleasant feeling and then it disappears. And the next moment you get another unpleasant feeling and again it disappears. Supreme Buddha explains all feelings that we felt in the past, where are they now? If you look back into the past, how many times have you become extremely happy? How many times have you cried? How many times have you felt unpleasant? Right? But but are those feelings there now? No. They appeared and they disappeared, just like a water bubble. Okay? And the feelings that we have now in the present, they are also like that. When there's a certain contact, according to the contact, we have a feeling. And when the contact changes, the feeling changes. And the same in the future as we go on further and further in this journey of samsara. In the future, we will get many feelings, pleasant feelings, unhappy, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. And those feelings will also appear and disappear. There's nothing substantial in it. But the ordinary person who does not understand this reality, he clings to these feelings, this nature of feeling, and he takes it as me, I'm feeling it. I am sad, I'm happy, and clings to these feelings as me, mine, and I. That is the reason that we are continuing in this samsara. But the Supreme Buddha explained, if a person understands this reality about feelings, then he realizes that there's nothing substantial in feeling. This void, it's hollow. When the cause is there, the result is there. When the cause ceases, the result ceases. And therefore, when he understands the reality of feelings, he does not cling to it and take it as me, mine, and I. He simply sees it, the cause and effect process of it. He realizes when contact changes, feelings changes. It's not something that we can control. Okay? So if a person starts to think of feelings as being like a water bubble, it appears and it bursts, the Supreme Buddha explains, then that helps that person to understand the reality of feelings and therefore will not cling to feelings. Okay, so that is the second aggregate of clinging. So far we talked about two aggregates of clinging. The first is Rupapadana Kanda, the aggregate of forms, the form aggregate of clinging. And the second is the feeling aggregate of clinging. Okay. So these are the reasons that we are continuing to be reborn again and again and again. Okay. So if a person can understand the reality of these aggregates and feel dispassion towards them and abandon clinging, then that person can escape from suffering. But you need a lot of wisdom to understand this. This is very difficult to understand. It's not easy to understand. It's very deep and complex. Okay. But the Supreme Buddha understood the reality of these five aggregates of clinging, and all arahants understood the reality of the five aggregates of clinging and therefore abandoned the clinging and became free from samsara. Okay. So that's the second one. And the third aggregate of clinging is Sanya Upadana Kanda, the aggregate of perception. perceiving. Okay, so sanya, perception. Perception is also formed by contact. Okay, perception means, so now the eye, contact means eye, contact means the mergence of three things. That is the eye, the form, and the eye consciousness. So when those three gets together, we call it contact. And through contact, there arises feelings, there arises perception. Okay, so suppose someone comes in front of us. Okay, so the eye and that form and the eye consciousness gets together and there's contact. And through contact, we feel. Okay, so if and then we perceive. So if it's someone, if it's our son, we recognize that person, we perceive that person, this is my son. Okay, by the shape of it, by the colors of it, right? By the appearance, we perceive who that person is. And now suppose two 27-year-olds come in front of you. One is your son, one is your neighbor, right? So when those two forms are in front of you, you're able to recognize this is my son and this is my neighbor. How? Through perception. Okay? Using the colors, using the shape, you're able to perceive this is so and so and this is so and so. That's what perception is. Okay, so we perceive things. The Supreme Buddha explains this perception. So we perceive things as being good, we perceive things as being bad. The Supreme Buddha explains these things that we perceive are like a mirage. What's this perception like? What's the simile the Supreme Buddha gives for perception? A mirage. I'm sure all of you have seen mirages, right? So from the far, in very dry days, from the far, when the road is very straight, from the far, it seems like there's water there, right? So this happens to animals. Animals, when they see as if there's water in the front, they walk a long way to go and drink some water. But once they get there, is there water there? No, there is no water there. The Supreme Buddha explains this perception is also like that. We perceive in the wrong way, right? Those animals, they perceived as if there was water there, but once we got there, there is no water there. The Supreme Buddha explains the reason that we are continuing in this journey of birth and death is we perceive things in the wrong way. Okay, it's like a mirage. We are fooled by it. We think there's something there. We think there's something substantial there, but it's really not there. Okay, this is what explains. We perceive what is foul as being attractive. Like the ordinary person looks at this body as being very attractive. But is it actually attractive? A person actually investigates the reality of this body. If you take the skin out, you don't have to go any further. Okay, the ordinary person perceives this physical body as being very attractive. People are so attached and attracted to this body. But if we take this external skin away, would you still find it to be attractive? Absolutely not. Right? So the Supreme Buddha explains, we perceive what is actually foul as being attractive. That's why we become attached to it. We perceive what is suffering as something pleasant. Dukkhe sukha sanya. That means those things that gives us suffering, we look at them as something that gives us happiness. Okay? Like for example, these things in the sensual pleasure, children husbands, wives, right? So we look at these people as people who truly gives us happiness in our life. However, many people in this world suffer a lot because of those people who they make closer to their life, to thinking that they will bring you that they will bring you happiness in life. Right, that's the reason that many people get married. That's the reason that many people get have children, to be happy, thinking you will truly get the real happiness through them. But the Supreme Buddha explains it's through those same people that you feel suffering, that you feel unhappiness, right? When they don't behave the way when they don't behave the way we want, and when they change, right? When we lose them, through those things we feel so much suffering. So those same things that we bring close to us, thinking that will bring us happiness, is the same thing that gives us so much suffering in life. So the Supreme Buddha explains, we perceive what is suffering as happiness. And then the Supreme Buddha explains, we perceive what is impermanent as being permanent. Right? So the ordinary person thinks all of these things are going to be there forever. That's why they cling to these things. They think of this body as being permanent. It's going to be there forever. They don't like to think of the fact that this body can age and die at any time. So this perception of perceiving what is impermanent as permanent, these perceptions are the ones that makes us continue to go in this samsara. Okay, so what we perceive is it's like a mirage. There's nothing substantial there. Okay, so this is what the expensive person understands perception as being like a mirage, then that attachment, that strong sense of I, me, and mine to the perceptions that a person has will disappear, and he will feel dispassion towards perceptions, sanya. Okay, that is the third one. And then this Vivek explains the fourth aggregate of clinging is Sankarupadana Kanda. Sankarupadana Kanda means for volitional formational aggregate of clinging. So what Sankara here means Chetana. Chetana means volitional formation. So this is what explains, if a person purposely thinks to do something, that can be said as Chetana. Okay, that's what volitional formations are, Chetana. So when we see something, we give rise to Chetana, volitional formations. It's because of volitional formations that we do things, that we say things, and we think things. Right? For example, when a person sees someone they don't like, okay, what happens? You think, oh, I'm going to hit him, and you hit. So you first think it in your mind, and then you do it. And then if you see someone that you don't like, you think, oh, I'm going to blame this person. So you first think it, and then you blame that person. That's what volition is. Thinking, purposely thinking something. And then you do it, and then you say it, and you think it over and over again. That's how volition is. So Buddha explains, once you give rise to a volitional formation, it leads to karma. Okay, so the moment you think that you want to kill someone, that's a bad karma that leads to bad karma, and then you, through your body, you do it. Okay, then that leads to bad karma. And then you think in your mind, oh, I'm going to blame this person. And and then you go ahead and blame that person. And so that leads to bad karma. Okay. And then you see someone and you feel like you see something and then you want to steal it. So in your mind, you think, oh, I want to steal it, and then you do it. So all of those leads to results. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains these volitions. So from the moment we are born, we are giving rise to these volitional formations. We are making big plans for our lives, and we're doing things by thinking. Right, there's no end to this thinking. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get a good job, I'm going to get married, and then I'm going to have children. You're thinking and thinking and thinking and doing things, and continuing to do this, and thinking that you're going to find something substantial in this life. But the Supreme Buddha explains this process of thinking, this volitional formation, the simile the Supreme Buddha uses is, the Supreme Buddha explains these volitional formations are like searching for heartwood in the trunk of a large plantain tree. Can a person ever find heartwood in a plantain tree? Have you seen plantain trees? If you have seen, then you would know. Right? Plantain trees don't have a heartwood. So if a person goes and peels the plantain tree, thinking there's a heartwood there, thinking he would be able to find heartwood there, would he ever be able to find heartwood? No. Then he goes to the next tree, and then he peels it, thinking he would find heartwood there. From like this, from tree to tree, he goes on looking for heartwood, but he would never find heartwood in a plantain tree. The Supreme Buddha explains these volitional formations are also like this. We thinking and thinking and thinking and planning things, we give rise to volitional formations. But at the end, there's nothing substantial there. Right? Now, from our childhood, we make plans, we think and we do things, we plan things, and little by little we age, and then we fall sick, and then when it get times for us to die, all of those things, when we look back at our life, all of those things that we thought, it's like a dream. There's nothing there, and there's nothing substantial left over. Right? So people with experienced volitional formations are like that. So what most people do is, in this life, they try to find happiness, they try to be successful in this life, and if they try to find people who love them in this life, and if they can't find that happiness in this life, then they think, okay, in my next life, I will find a nice husband. In my next life, I will find good children. In my next life, I will get a good job. So just like going from tree to a tree, from one plantain tree to another plantain tree, looking for heartwood, people in this world, they're going from one life to another, searching for something substantial where there is nothing substantial there. Okay, so this part is a bit difficult to understand. But at first, remember the Dhamma in the way the Supreme Buddha has taught. Okay. And then the last one is, so the Supreme Buddha explains, if a person looks into the reality of these volitional formations, he realizes there's absolutely, it's very hollow, it's insubstantial. You cannot take these volitional formations as me, mine, and me, mine, and I, because we cannot control these. Once we give rise to a thought, we will have to face the consequences. We cannot reverse it. That's why the Supreme Buddha explains these volitional formations. There's nothing to call me, mine, or I there. Once we think a bad thought, once we give rise to a bad thought and we go ahead and do that bad thing, then that leads to karma and we cannot reverse it. It's not in our control. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains these volitional formations are like trying to find heartwood in a plantain tree. And fifth one, this is the most difficult one to understand, is consciousness. Okay, the consciousness aggregate of clinging, Vijnana Upadana Khanda. Vijnana is consciousness, right? So Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, all four is based on consciousness. Okay, in this form, there's consciousness inside. And feelings are based on consciousness because the I, the form, and the I consciousness has to merge in order for a person to feel, in order for a person to perceive, and in order for a person to give rise to volitional formations. So Vijnana is hidden inside the first four, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara. If Vijnana is not active in this body, we wouldn't be alive. Okay, so it's that complementary merging of these things that gives rise to what we call life. It's this complementary merging of these five things together that gives rise to what we call this life. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So remember the explains this Vijnana, it's the base for all of those things. It's they're hidden in all of those things. And the nature of this Vijnana is like a magician. Vijnana means knowing something. Okay, so it's like a magician. As remember the explains, suppose there's a magician in a four-way junction, and people, so in a four-way junction, a person can come from either direction and look at the magician, what he's doing, and see the magic. All right. Now, usually when a magician is showing magic, people are in front and there's nobody from either side or the back. That's the way he hides what he's doing and shows the magic, right? But the Supreme Buddha, explains this consciousness is a magician who's in the middle of a four-way junction. So even if people are all around him, no one can catch what he's doing. He appears, he makes the magic, not letting anyone around him see what he's doing. That's how how do you call it? That's how skilled he is at showing an illusion. Do you understand? So consciousness is like that. It shows as an illusion. It shows as an illusion. Everything that we see around, it shows as an illusion, and therefore it makes us deluded and does not make us understand the reality. Okay, because that consciousness is based on ignorance. Ignorance is not understanding the Four Noble Truths, not understanding the reality. Because that consciousness is based on ignorance, we're not able to know things as it is. We are not able to understand the reality of it. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains this consciousness is like a magician in the middle of a four-way junction. It's making an illusion to us, and therefore we're deluded. And therefore we think this body is me, mine, and I. These feelings are me, mine, and I. These perceptions are me, mine, and I. These volitional formations are me, mine, and I, because it's completely making us blind, showing us an illusion. Because consciousness is in all four of them, is the base for all four of them, the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara. Okay, so the Supreme Buddha explains these are the five aggregates of clinging. Okay, so if a person understands the reality of these five aggregates of clinging, then the Supreme Buddha explains that person, that noble disciple, would feel revulsion towards these five aggregates of clinging. That means he would feel dispassion towards these five aggregates of clinging. And once a person destroys and becomes dispassionate about these five aggregates of clinging, then he realizes that there is nothing to call me, mine, or I. in this body, in these feelings, in these perceptions, in these volitional formations, in this consciousness. And therefore he become free, he become liberated, and he become free from this samsara. Okay, so and at the end of this sutta, the Supreme Buddha summarizes this sutta in a gatha. The Supreme Buddha explains, form is like a lump of foam and feeling like a water bubble. Perception is like a mirage and volition is like a plantain trunk. And consciousness like an illusion. Okay, and the Supreme Buddha explains furthermore and explains a bhikkhu who has aroused energy should look upon the aggregates like this. And if day and night he looks at the aggregates like this, comprehending and ever mindful, he is able to let go of all fetters and make a refuge for himself. And he's able to reach the imperishable state, which is Nibbana. Okay, so I just quickly summarized what's in the gathas. There are more gathas there, but because of the time, I shortened and summarized it like that. Okay, so what we learned is something very, very deep and very, very complex and very, very difficult to understand. So if you can at least form a pleasant mind about the Supreme Buddha's great understanding, the Supreme Buddha's great wisdom, because there's nobody else in this world who understood the reality of these five aggregates of clinging. It's through a Buddha's eye, it's through a Buddha's wisdom that he's able to understand the reality of these five aggregates, and therefore the taught us the reality. So if we can at least form a pleasant mind and gradually learn about these five aggregates of clinging and how to understand the reality of these things, we will also be able to develop our wisdom and understand the Dhamma and become dispassionate about these five aggregates of clinging and become free from samsara. So may this beautiful deep sutta that we learned today help all of us to understand the reality of the five aggregates of clinging and become dispassionate and understand the Four Noble Truths completely and become free from this long journey of birth and death in this Gautam Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.